All right, so today we're tackling a really big and honestly pretty controversial idea. It's a theory that tried to answer a massive question that everyone was asking back in the day. Now that the Cold War is over, what's next? What's going to drive global conflict from here on out? Let's dive in and break it down.
So here's how we're going to walk through this. First, we'll get into the main argument, this idea of a totally new kind of global conflict. Then we're going to apply that idea to two huge, and I mean huge examples. The long, complicated history between the Islamic world and the West, and of course the rise of China. After that, we'll explore the tough spot this puts other countries in, and finally we'll pull it all together to see the new world map this whole theory lays out.
Okay, so picture this. The Berlin Wall comes down. The Soviet Union collapses. Suddenly the entire rule book for how the world works for the last 50 years, it's just gone. The epic battle between capitalism and communism is over. The big question on everyone's mind was, so what now? Well, the theory we're digging into today, it offered up an answer that was pretty bold and for a lot of people, kind of shocking.
And here it is, the central argument in a nutshell. The big conflicts of the future, they're not going to be about ideology, like communism versus capitalism. They're not even really going to be about economics. They're going to be about culture.
So what does that even mean? Well, think of it like this. The theory argues that civilizations, Western, Islamic, Cynic, and so on, are basically the biggest tribes on the planet. And a clash of civilizations, that's really just tribal conflict on a global scale. The prediction is that countries will start to huddle together with others from their own tribe, their own civilization. And where those civilizations meet, well, that's where you get the fault lines of this new world.
And this theory actually breaks it down into two different kinds of conflict. You've got your fault line conflicts. These are the local flare-ups, right on the ground where different civilizations physically border each other. Think of neighbors from different cultures clashing. But then there's the big one, core state conflicts. This is the global chess game between the major players of each civilization. Think the US versus China, battling over power, values, and who gets to set the rules for the rest of the world. Keeping these two ideas separate is super important for everything that comes next.
All right, let's put this theory to the test with our first big case study. The framework makes a pretty provocative claim here. It says that the tension we see between the Islamic world and the West, it's not something new. Not at all. In fact, it's a rivalry that goes back 1,400 years, an ancient clash that just keeps recurring.
And this quote from the historian Bernard Lewis, which the author cites, just nails the point. He calls it an historic reaction of an ancient rival. The argument is that this isn't just about politics today. It's about something much deeper, a fundamental clash between two really powerful, very different ways of seeing the world.
And when you look at the long arc of history, you see this pattern of, surges and counter-surges. It's like a tide. You have the initial wave of Islamic expansion, right? Then Christendom pushes back with the Crusades. Then comes the Ottoman Empire, pushing deep into Europe. And then the West pushes back again with centuries of colonialism. When you lay it all out like that, this back and forth, this recurring conflict, it becomes pretty stark.
So what's driving all this, according to the theory? It's not just about land or money. It's these fundamental differences in culture and religion. And here's the key. Both civilizations are described as universalistic. What that means is both kind of feel their ways the right way, for everyone. When you have two massive civilizations that both believe they have the ultimate answer for humanity, well, you're going to get some friction. You see it baked into historical concepts like jihad on one side and crusade on the other.
And this wasn't just some abstract academic idea. The author points to actual data. Take this poll from France in 1991. The Soviet Union is gone, right? So who are people worried about? The top three most feared countries were Iraq, Iran, and Libya. It's a fascinating snapshot showing how almost immediately this idea of an Islamic threat started to replace the old fear of the Soviets in the public's mind.
So the theory coins this term, a quasi-war, to describe the modern relationship. It's not an all-out war, not World War III. It's more of this constant, simmering conflict. A quasi-war fought with very different weapons, terrorism on one side and high-tech air power on the other. But this wasn't the only fault line the theory pointed to.
Let's pivot to the second major fault line. The theory identifies another huge, massive challenge to the West, the reemergence of China as a global power. And this is framed as the next great core state conflict, the big one on the horizon. And we're not just talking about factories and trade here. The author points to the numbers, a 50% real increase in military spending in just 5 years, from 88 to 93. That's not just pocket change. That's a clear signal that the goal is to turn all that economic power into serious military muscle.
So, if China becomes the dominant power in its region,
What does it want? Well, according to this theory, it wants other countries to fall in line, to accept its claims in places like the South China Sea, to not gang up against it in alliances, basically to acknowledge that China is the top dog in the neighborhood. It's the classic playbook for any rising great power.
Okay, so this puts every other country in a really tough spot. When a new superpower starts flexing its muscles, what do? Do you try to team up and push back? Or do you just get on board and hope for the best?
These two choices have names in international relations. Balancing is what it sounds like. You and your friends try to build up power to balance against the new big guy. The theory says this is a very Western, very European way of thinking. The other option is bandwagoning. That's when you decide it's easier to just join the winning team. And here's the really interesting cultural twist in the argument. The author suggests that in Asia, historically, there's been much more of a tendency to just accept and accommodate whoever is the strongest power in the region.
And that leads to a really big prediction. The theory claims that most countries in East Asia, instead of siding with the US to balance against China, are eventually going to bandwagon with China. They'll be pulled into its orbit. Why? Because the cultural and historical pull of China as the traditional center of the region is just too powerful to fight.
Okay, so let's step back and put all these pieces together. What kind of picture does this paint? Well, it's a completely new kind of world map, where the lines aren't drawn by politics or ideology, but by culture.
The new rule of thumb is simple but really powerful. Your cultural kin is your new ally. Shared history, shared religion, shared identity, that's what's going to matter most. More than old Cold War alliances, more than trade deals. And this leads to one of the most talked about ideas in the whole theory, this so-called Confucian-Islamic connection. Now, this isn't some formal treaty like NATO. It's more of a loose, informal team-up. You've got countries like China, Pakistan, and Iran finding common ground because they all want to push back against the West's influence, especially on sensitive topics like human rights and military tech.
But it's not a simple two-sided game. There are major wildcards out there. The theory calls them swing powers, big countries like Russia and India that don't really fit neatly into any one camp, and whoever they decide to align with could totally shift the global balance of power.
So here's the map, in broad strokes. You have the Sinic and Islamic civilizations as the main challengers to the West. Then you have your swing states, Russia playing its own game between Europe and Asia, and India, which is probably going to lean towards the West to help contain China. And then you have places like Latin America, which are seen as culturally closer and mostly in the Western orbit.
So what's the bottom line here? The simple, black and white, two-sided world of the Cold War, it's over. And what's replaced it, according to this theory, is a much messier, much more complicated world. A world with multiple poles of power, based on different civilizations, all interacting, competing, and teaming up in ways we've never really seen before.
And all of that leaves us with one final, very big question to think about. When you look at the world today, at the headlines, at the alliances being formed, does this framework make sense to you? Is the world actually realigning along these cultural and civilizational fault lines, or is this just one possible future among many?